While millions of people are yelling at their TVs, wearing team jerseys, and feeling emotionally crushed because 11 strangers lost a game, there's also a huge group of people who simply don't care. And according to neuroscience, their brains may actually function differently. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear could completely change the way you look at the sports-obsessed people around you. Here's the part nobody really talks about. Not caring about sports does not make you boring. It doesn't mean you lack passion, and it definitely doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. But there is something fascinating happening in your brain that's very different from the millions of people who follow sports like a religion. So let's start with the obvious question. Why do so many people care so much? Humans are naturally tribal. For most of human history, survival depended on belonging to a group. Your tribe protected you, hunted with you, and kept you alive. Sports are basically modern tribes with logos and merchandise. When someone watches their favorite team, the brain releases oxytocin, the bonding hormone, the same chemical connected to family attachment and close relationships. Crazy, right? Their brain genuinely begins treating those athletes like members of their own social circle. But here's where it gets interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often have what psychologists describe as weaker tribal instincts. Their identity is less dependent on belonging to a collective group. They tend to be more individualistic, more likely to think, I don't need to attach myself to a team to feel complete, and there's actual research supporting this. A 2019 study found that people with little interest in sports showed far less us versus them thinking, meaning they were less likely to dislike another group simply because they supported the opposing side. But it gets even stranger. What happens inside the brain of a hardcore sports fan during a game is honestly intense. You know the excitement you feel right before opening a gift? That anticipation is dopamine firing in your brain. Sports fans experience that same chemical rush constantly during games, every play, every score, every close moment. Tiny bursts of anticipation and reward over and over again. And yes, it can become addictive. Brain imaging studies using fMRI scans show that watching your team activates many of the same reward systems involved in gambling and other highly stimulating activities. And here's the key part, uncertainty is what makes it powerful. You never know whether your team will win or lose. That unpredictability keeps the dopamine cycle alive. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement one of the strongest reward systems known to human behavior. It's the same principle that makes slot machines so hard to walk away from. The mechanism is surprisingly similar to other behavioral addictions. Your brain doesn't care where the dopamine comes from. It just wants another hit. People who don't care about sports simply don't get that same reward response from watching competitive games. And researchers believe part of that difference may actually be genetic. Studies from the University of Chicago suggest that certain dopamine receptor gene variations may influence how strongly someone enjoys spectator competition. Think about that for a second. Your complete indifference to whether the Lakers win or lose could literally be written into your DNA. But there's another psychological layer. Sports fans often experience something called burgeoning, basking in reflected glory. When their team wins, they say, we won. But when their team loses, suddenly it becomes, they lost. Notice the switch? People who aren't deeply invested in sports are generally less likely to tie their identity to outside victories. Their sense of self tends to stay more stable and less dependent on outcomes they can't control. Now, before anyone gets defensive, this doesn't mean one side is better than the other. It simply means there are real psychological differences between sports fanatics and people who couldn't care less, and those differences are genuinely fascinating. Here's something unexpected. Sports fans often score higher on certain forms of empathy. They practice emotionally investing in the struggles and victories of people they've never met, simply because they wear the same colors. So why don't non-sports people feel that same emotional pull toward athletes? Because empathy works differently for them. Every person has a limited emotional bandwidth. People who aren't interested in sports often direct that emotional energy somewhere else: relationships, creativity, social causes, music, art, ideas, personal goals. In fact, a 2021 study found that people with low sports interests scored significantly higher in openness to experience and appreciation for art and beauty. In other words, they're still chasing meaning, excitement, connection, and emotional highs. They're just finding them through different experiences. And honestly, for some people, not caring about sports may also be connected to personal history. Maybe they were excluded from sports culture growing up. Maybe gym class was humiliating. Maybe they dislike the aggressive competitiveness that sometimes surrounds fandom. Or maybe they genuinely never understood why adults scream at televisions over a ball moving across a field. Your indifference may have a deeper reason. Or maybe you simply find sports boring. That's valid too. But here's the reason sports fans and non-sports fans often struggle to understand each other. They experience meaning differently. Sports fans find meaning in narrative, the underdog story, the comeback, the rivalry, the dynasty, real-time drama with unpredictable outcomes and emotional stakes. People who don't care about sports often look at that and think, why would I emotionally invest in something I can't control, involving people I don't know, in a game that doesn't affect my real life? And honestly, neither perspective is wrong. There's simply two different ways humans search for meaning and emotional fulfillment. One person finds inspiration in a championship run. Another finds it in a novel, a relationship, a creative project, or a scientific breakthrough. Researchers describe this as parasocial investment versus direct engagement. Sports fans often build one-sided emotional connections with teams and players. Non-sports people usually prefer investing their emotional energy into things where they directly participate, where their effort actually changes the outcome. Neither approach is superior. They're just different ways of navigating life. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who studied flow states and peak human experience, found that deep immersion can happen through almost any activity. For some people, that's sports. For others, it's literally anything else. And here's what's especially interesting. People who don't obsess over sports often report feeling more connected to their own lives. They're not spending every weekend emotionally absorbed in someone else's victories and failures. They're focused on their own. There's something quietly powerful about that. So what does all of this actually mean? If you don't care about sports, you are not missing some essential part of being human. Your brain simply processes reward, identity, connection, and meaning differently. And that's completely okay. So the next time someone asks, "Did you watch the game?" and you genuinely could not care less, remember this: you're not broken. You're not boring. You're just wired differently. You're playing a different game entirely. And maybe, just maybe, the stakes are even higher. If this resonated with you, you'll probably enjoy learning why quiet people process information differently from everyone else, and why that difference might actually be your greatest strength.